terrific speaker or anything like that, but he ought to have been able to have watched Panorama last night and demanded the resignation, at the very least, of the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, who looks ever more desperately hanging by a straw in this current disaster that he has overseen and has ministerial responsibility for. I give you just one example on the issue of PPE. It turned out that the government were only able to claim that they had distributed 1 billion pieces of PPE to our health service staff because they counted each rubber glove individually. Such a lie demands and would demand in any other period in which I've been involved in politics the immediate resignation of the minister responsible for that lie. Yet the Labour Party has not even raised that point today. The Labour leader has been utterly silent on the fact. I suppose we should be grateful they could have counted each finger on each glove as an individual item of PPE. The failure on PPE, the total grotesque failure on testing, which they keep announcing and keep failing to get anywhere remotely near that which they have promised. The failure of decades of neoliberalism and privatization and austerity to have not just a stockpile of what we'd need, but to have anything remotely like the capacity which our health service needs. And then there's the issue of our media. You may recall that when Panorama did a devastating attack on Labour on the issue of anti-Semitism, the newspapers were full of it even before it had aired. And then when it aired, it led the news, every news bulletin, every one. And then for many days, weeks, every newspaper referred to the Panorama on Labour's anti-Semitism scandal. In the case of last night's Panorama, even the BBC News has completely excised it from their record. It's nowhere to be found. No Laura Kunzberg tweets about this Panorama. No Mark will discuss it on Sunday. No one in the newspapers, in any newspaper, has picked the scandals that were revealed in last night's Panorama, has picked them up as a news story. And of course, neither has Keir Starmer. So our second demand is this. And I call on the Scottish comedian Frankie Boyle, that I find myself increasingly doing so. In this time of crisis, Britain's newspapers are in very serious danger of going out of business. And therefore, there has never been a more important time not to buy them, not to buy, not to support a media which is clearly, in case we needed any new evidence, is clearly a conspiracy against the people. They don't like to hear that. They don't like to be revealed as not a fourth estate holding the other estates to account, but in fact, having woven themselves until they are indistinguishable from the practice of power in Britain. So if you're still buying newspapers, please stop it. Journalists and broadcasters, our demand is that they speak out, like Piers Morgan. Who'd have thunk it? The most effective opposition in Britain today to the Conservative government and to the silence of the Labour opposition is Piers Morgan. And he's doing it every day and all day. Every morning, Monday to Thursday on Good Morning Britain, and all day on his 7 or 8 million followed Twitter account. Any journalist that's not doing that, any broadcaster that's doing the opposite of that, any broadcaster that is kissing the backside of and covering the backside of those who are in power today is undeserving of the name. And I think the worst example of all is Robert Peston on ITV. But there are many, many contenders for that job. So our demands are for a popular press, for popular media, and we're doing what we can to build one. If you're not listening, watching to the mother of all talk shows on Sunday nights at 7 o'clock, you should be. And you'll be the better for it. And if you're not following me and other leaders like Ranjit and Jyoti on the Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, you really should be. Because we have to build these platforms. Our demands are for a people's media and for the media of our enemies to be boycotted. For example, if you see on Twitter an article in The Guardian, don't retweet it. Like it by any means, but don't retweet The Guardian, because in doing so you are merely assisting them, no matter what the article was about. So, what are general demands? Well, in relation to the immediate crisis, they are this. I reiterate, no one must be forced back to work in a toxic, potentially fatal environment, neither forced by poverty or by government diktat, still less by the clamour of the donors to the Conservative Party and, it turns out, to the Labour Party, because its donors turn out to be precisely the kind of people who donate to the Conservative Party. It's back to business as was usual before the brief interregnum. As a matter of fact, it's a crime to force a worker to work in an unsafe environment. And now we have a price on it. Now we can put a price ticket on the life of a frontline worker in the public service, in the National Health Service. A nurse or a doctor who catches coronavirus at work, as long as they've worked in the NHS for 2 years, and who dies of it, their family will receive the princely sum of £60,000. Now, I've heard the phrase adding insult to injury, but that just about takes the biscuit. Shall I tell you what the family of a member of parliament who died in service at work would receive? They would receive £500,000. For obvious reasons, I know that, because I used to sometimes travel as a member of parliament to dangerous places. And if I had perished there in the service of the parliament, my family would have received £500,000. But a nurse or a doctor sent due to their employer's negligence into battle against COVID-19 without even the basic personal protection will receive 60,000. And as a matter of fact, the family of a member of parliament would not just get the £500,000 payout, but would then get one of the country's best pensions for the rest of the widow's life. Now that we know what value, under pressure, the government puts on our public services, then our demand is galvanized. And it's this: no one must be forced back to work. By poverty, they must be fully compensated, not 80%. Why 80%? They're printing all this money anyway. This is funny money anyway. It's quantitative easing. In that case, why are you only compensating the workers and not all workers to 80% when you could just as easily compensate them at the rate of 100%? Therefore, they'd be able to continue to meet their commitments. After all, you're giving a king's ransom, and you're still thinking about giving £500 million to Richard Branson, who doesn't even live here, doesn't pay tax here, sued the National Health Service when he didn't get a contract, wrecked our railway service in the north. You're still negotiating with him over a bailout of his Virgin Airlines. So we demand full compensation for the workers, and we demand full protection for the workers, key workers, essential workers that have to go to work. Otherwise, our country will literally fall apart, and there'll be nobody working in the hospitals and on the front line and delivering food. I see several shop workers now are amongst those who have contracted the virus at work and died. They won't even be getting 60,000 or nothing like it from the giants of the food distribution and retail industries. Those that have to go to work because they're key workers must be fully protected by the very best PPE. And don't tell me it's not possible for this to happen. It's clearly been, I know there's always a dispute or a debate whether we're run by James Bond or Austin Powers, but it must be a deliberate action not to have now, 3 months into this crisis, if not nearly 4 months into this crisis, not been able to produce gowns for doctors in the wards where huge numbers of patients are coughing and spluttering and some of them dying. It has to be a deliberate act by the government not to have responded to Operation Cygnus in 2016, which clearly showed that the health service, attacked by a virus coming from East Asia, of a flu-like virus, would quickly overwhelm the National Health Service, and it would literally fall over. It must have been a deliberate decision not to take the steps necessary to protect our people and to protect our staff when they had the results of Operation Cygnus. And now we have a health minister on the Piers Morgan show this morning claimed never to have heard of Operation Cygnus. Now, if that's true, she's too stupid to be a health minister. And if it's untrue, she's too wicked to be a health minister. Yet no one from the Labour front bench asked for her resignation following her performance this morning. So on the current circumstances, our demands are clear. We're the Workers' Party. We defend the workers. We defend their health and we defend their livelihoods. And we have no other master, you see. No big bookie gave us big money. No Israel lobbyist gave us big money. No construction company, no bank, no insurance company, no pharmaceutical company either gave us any money or will ever be allowed to give us any money. Unlike the Labour Party, we have only one master, and that master is the working class and their interests, their health, their well-being, and their livelihoods and their future. And that is a very big difference between us and the Labour Party. And it will never, long after I'm gone, it will never be any different. Our party holds the flame that Labour once claimed to be holding. Although if you look at their history, they stopped holding it a very, very long time ago. But it throws up other general issues. You see, I keep hearing sometimes from the most surprising people, well, you know, the economy can't afford these demands that the workers should stay at home until it's safe for them to go back to work. Well, in that case, we need a different economy. If the system cannot ensure the protection of the people of the country, we need a different system. That seems to me obvious, but only the Workers' Party are actually raising it. If you cannot feed your people, if you cannot keep your people alive and healthy, then you shouldn't be in power. And the system that you represent is clearly not fit for purpose. For what purpose can an economy have except to keep the people healthy and make them wealthy, not just in the sense of spending power, but in the social wage that is increasingly and will be increasingly important for the future of our country. So this raises one of the Workers' Party's most important demands. We demand public ownership of the economy. Capitalism depends on private property. Socialism depends on public property. And we're not afraid to say that. There's no reason why you need Richard Branson to run your railways. The public can run your railways. There's no reason why you need Richard Branson to run an airline operating out of this country until times are rough and then you've got to pay for it. We should, the public should, in a planned way, own our airlines. There's no reason why British Airways, flying our flag, getting plum position in our airports, should be a private company. Why? It wasn't a private company in the beginning, and it oughtn't to be now. British Airways have just announced 12,000 redundancies. Well, it may be that there will be a significant rationalization of the airline industry. It may be that the era of mass tourism has now come to an end. That all may be true. And we may have to, if we had publicly owned aviation, we would maybe have to diversify and find other work for people. But we believe that the state acting on behalf of the people must control the commanding heights of the British economy, precisely because the private hands in which our commanding heights now lie are not capable of rationally, safely administering that economy. So we urge everyone to make the leap of imagination, to imagine that we can do it ourselves, that we have no need of the parasite sitting on the back of the workers, feeding from the toil and effort, physical and mental, of the working class, because that's what they're doing. Because this current juncture proves beyond all doubt that if the workers aren't working, then the boss and capital means absolutely nothing at all. You can't eat money. And the food has to be made, grown by workers, distributed by workers, sold by workers, not by the owners of the shares. I see that the shares are all falling. What difference does that make? Whether shares are down or up. It makes no difference to the material reality that the working class produces all wealth and has no need of the parasite on its back. That seems to me now thrown into sharp relief. And for those who say, well, you need money, you need capital, but they're making the money. They are right now in the Bank of England, metaphorically speaking, turning the presses, making it, they're inventing it. So why can't we do that? Why do we need them to suck this wealth out of our society and buy their Caribbean islands and the like with it? So our demand is for an economy run by the people, for the people. I think that's a reasonable and moderate demand. It used to be ABC on the left and amongst people who thought themselves socialist, but that slipped off the agenda very considerably. We demand an economy run by the people for the people. We demand a people's media. We demand a properly functioning democracy with a government and with an opposition that acts like an opposition. We demand that the waste in which we are currently involved be curbed and curtailed. Did you know that every time a Russian ship sails through the channel headed for the Mediterranean, that the British government scrambles aircraft and battleships to escort them through the channel as if they were going to turn their guns and fire at us? This waste of the precious resources of our man and woman power in our defense forces has nothing to do with the public interest. The public are not afraid of Russia, except those that have been fooled into being so. The public are in no danger from China, and yet we are now embarked on first propaganda, second economic, and who knows, third perhaps physical confrontation with both Russia and China. We demand an end to that. We fought for Britain's withdrawal from the European Union, not so we could alienate both the European Union and everybody else in the world except Donald Trump's America in the process, but that's where we are. We are now at daggers drawn with China, daggers drawn with Russia. We're at daggers drawn with Iran. We're at daggers drawn with everybody in the world now, except Donald Trump, and the rate he's going, he'll be lucky to last until November, never mind after November. So we demand a foreign policy, a defense policy in the interests of the people. And that's why we've laid out in our manifesto, in our book of policies, which you get when you join the Workers' Party, or you pay a very small amount of money, you can get it and study it before deciding to join. We lay out the kind of society, the kind of economy that we stand for and that we fight for. A society in which our old people are not packed off into care homes, as they are sometimes called, that turn out to be one step before the mortuary, become a charnel house with giant numbers of our people being killed there. We believe in a society where our elderly can live with us, and the state will invest in that, thus saving public resources further down the line. I have time only to deal with one other aspect of the demands of the Workers' Party. And we're all going to have to pay more attention to this. Some of you already have. I'm not the greenest of guys. And some of you are much greener than me. But it's quite clear to me now, having studied now this coronavirus issue and the issue of virus and health and so on, much more closely than I have before, that we are going to have to really transform the way in which our economy, our society functions in relation to the natural world. How we're going to get back into rhythm with the natural world, or frankly, we're headed for disaster if we keep, as capitalism does and must, ineluctably must, despoil the earth and the planet, rapaciously consume its beauty and its wealth. We are storing up enormous troubles for ourselves. If not for ourselves, then for our children, which is a grossly irresponsible thing to do. One would never willfully damage the lives of our own children. But if we are collectively damaging the lives of all of our children in the next generations by poisoning the environment and the earth, then we are guilty of a very great crime indeed. Anyway, Daniel, that's me. I'm happy to take any questions from the members over the remains of the meeting. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, George. I think that was a fantastic speech, and it's good to remind people as well through speech like that, with all the negativity and chaos going on, we bring a positive message as well. And I think that's really come through tonight. And a positive message comes through from one of our members, John Larkin. Someone who might be familiar with what's been happening to him, but I'll just read out his message for you. He was suspended from work a little while ago for asking for proper protective equipment in the bus depot and for bus drivers. And he's joining us tonight, but he can't speak. So he sent in this message. I'm sorry not to have actively participated in last week's meetings. Some of you know that last week I was suspended from work and had to prepare for my informal and formal hearings whilst trying to celebrate my son's first birthday. In a disciplinary that felt more like a McCarthyite trial, I had to defend myself and my actions. I was, thankfully, able to do this well, but I've said to a few comrades in the past week that without George Galloway, without the Workers' Party of Britain, and the amazing supportive members, I'd have probably been flattened by company mechanisms and procedure. The fact that I came out with a verbal warning for alleged gross misconduct indicates two things. Firstly, that managers of big companies and institutions want to strike fear into working people for simply wanting a better working environment and speaking out when necessary. Second, it indicates the strong case and defence that I was able to put forward. This defence and case building was not something I did wholly independently. It was done so using the ideas suggested to me by the good comrades of the Workers' Party of Britain. Whether it was the late night phone calls and messages to our party leaders and volunteers, or simply asking you to share a tweet, you've all gone above and beyond. And for that, I'm extremely thankful. Thank you, from John Larkin.
Well, bravo, John. In fact, John is one of our most important and earliest of cadre. He is a bus driver in Merseyside. And as he's just said in that message, he's been disciplined for seeking to demand that which legally his members were entitled to. It is illegal, as I said earlier, under the laws that govern the workplace, some of which I was involved in legislating for. It's illegal to send a worker willfully into work, unprotected from hazards and dangers that you know to be present, and opens up the employer, I firmly believe, to criminal prosecution for loss of life. I myself was quite involved with John Prescott and Alan Meale, Sir Alan Meale, or Lord Alan Meale as he probably is now, and Lord Prescott in the corporate manslaughter bill, which became an act in which we were determined that employers that did not take the necessary precautions, which led to the serious injury or even death of workers, must be properly prosecuted. I was quite heavily involved in that. And that's what's happening with these bus companies. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, the people running these private bus companies, they are all sending their workforce into a hazardous, potentially dangerous, potentially fatal workplace, and they must be held to account for it. And it's a disgrace that we are having to be raising money to support John and people like him who are whistleblowers for the public good. This is a job the union should be doing. I know Unite have been supporting John, but where's the TUC in all this? As a matter of fact, where are most of the unions in all of this crisis? Why is it us who are not being paid to represent transport workers, health service workers? Why is it us that are having to do all the shouting? I ask myself that most days, every day. Thanks, John.
Fantastic. And we have a question from Fran. Go ahead, Fran.
You all right, George?
Hi there.
All right. I just wanted you to quickly maybe give a little message to anybody in the Labour Party who's like struggling to leave because they're still nostalgic for Corbyn and stuff, and why they should join us and help us build a mass movement. That's all I want you to do, really.
It's a good question. I think that it's partly cultural. It's kind of Stockholm syndrome. You've been so many years in the Labour Party, you are institutionalized in it like an old lag that doesn't want out of jail when offered their freedom. It's partly that, and I know that because I too suffered that syndrome after, in my case, 33 years in the Labour Party. Being thrown out of it by Tony Blair ought to have been a blessing. It ought to have felt like paradise for me, but it didn't. It was like a stab in the heart. It was difficult for me to accept it, because after 33 years I had become a part of it and it a part of me. So it's partly that. It's partly opportunism. At this moment in time, you've not got much chance of becoming a Labour MP, because Labour ain't going to be winning many new parliamentary seats, but there are people who are in the Labour Party for what they can get out of it, either a seat in Parliament or some patronage somewhere down the line, or a seat on a council, or a council leadership, a committee chairmanship, and so on. Don't underestimate the considerable number of people who are motivated by opportunism and have to defend the staying in the Labour Party somehow, rather than to reveal their actual reason for doing it. Others are well-intentioned, but are pursuing a policy that is ill-conceived. I still see people making pronouncements about what the Labour Party needs to be. But if it didn't be that during 5 years of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, if it didn't become that under Corbyn and McDonnell and Abbott and the rest, how conceivably can it become what you say you think it needs to become under Sir Keir Starmer, whose position is unassailable? I have to stress this. There can be no challenge to Sir Keir Starmer. It's literally impossible. So he is the leader, and he's not going to get any better. And the rules are already beginning to be redrawn, and the bureaucracy will be reinforced in its hostility to people who are genuine socialists in the Labour Party. So I say to them, you know, jump before you're pushed. They're coming to get you. They're trolling your social media already. They're suspending you already. And soon they will be expelling you. So why waste your time? How many more years are you going to spend trying to make a Labour Party that has never actually been what you know it needs to be somehow magically transform itself into that which you know that it needs to be? Why not join us? Because we are the genuine article, and you don't have to fight in the Workers' Party against other members of the Workers' Party. You don't have to fight your own leaders for an indeterminate amount of time in the hope that you might prevail over them. Why not fight the system? Fight the enemy. Isn't that what we came into socialist politics to do? To fight for socialism, not to fight other people in our own party all our lives, because that's what you're letting yourselves in for if you stay in Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Thanks for that.
Thanks, George. And we've got a load of fantastic accounts from people joining the party from Labour on our Twitter profile that people can find there and discover their journeys into joining us. We have a couple of written in questions here. The first one is from Alfrey, and he asks, Hancock has stated that services such as mental health can start to reopen again, but they've never been officially closed. How do we challenge this kind of rhetoric when the mainstream media is for the Tory party and there is no opposition? I've approached my local Labour councillor for help and they've completely ignored me.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of polity we now have. Two cheeks of the same arse. And neither cheek is more attractive than the other. Frankly, the Labour front bench, I see that it was Rachel Reeves that they fielded today. I can think of no more repulsive representative of any political party than Rachel Reeves. Utterly repulsive record on all matters, domestic and international, on issues of poverty and so on. An absolutely scandalous record of opposition to the interests of the people, and she's the opposition spokesperson. So what about the government? Hancock is like increasingly looking to me, as I called him last week, I think, a Pinocchio, fashioned from wood, but he's never going to come alive, and he'll be, I think, the fall guy for this. But it's important that we don't let them away with the ritual sacrifice of Matt Hancock, because the people right at the top of the Conservative Party are the people who need to carry the can for this.
Thanks, George. And we have a question from Rob Amos. Go ahead, Rob.
Cheers. So I live in Stoke-on-Trent, known as the Potteries. Used to produce a lot of ceramic ware that was world famous. It still produces a lot of ceramic pottery, but doesn't employ anywhere near the number of people that it used to. As a result of this sort of disappearance of the sort of manufacturing that used to be around here, you know, the communities have been affected quite badly, and it's really sort of affected what, you know, what you say, like the social fabric of the place. There's still lots of people around here that, you know, not that long ago used to work in a capacity that was creative, productive manufacturing, that required, you know, quite a lot of skill, and there's a lot of talent sort of latent in people. But the deindustrialization, you know, has really kind of had a detrimental effect on the community of the place. So I'm thinking that it's not just a case of why we need some sort of industry for wages, but also to, you know, help kind of rebuild, in a sense, community and senses of community, and that would be something that we should look towards. But I'm just wondering if we have any ideas about how this could be done as a long-term plan.
Well, thanks, Rob. I recall vividly, I think it was the 20th anniversary of the miners' strike, speaking in Stoke on a panel, and with a substantial crowd of people who were the very artisans and workers in the coal industry that had been thrown on the scrap heap of whom you speak. And their children now, of course, have never learned the dignity of work. The dignity of work is a very important thing. The people who produced the pottery in the potteries were extremely proud of their product. They were extremely proud of the fact that their product went all around the world, was in demand all around the world. Even though they were only wage labor in the industry, they were proud of it. It's very important. I was around when it ceased to be the norm in Britain that you go to work. I was around when houses began to have their curtains closed all day. I was around when it started that the young people in a house could live their entire young life before heading out for the making of their own lives in a household where neither parent was working, which of course didn't only mean they were brought up in poverty, but it also means they were brought up in an atmosphere where there was no routine, no discipline, and no dignity of labor. And call me old-fashioned, I think that was the beginning of so many of the social problems that we have in Britain today. The period I talk of course, is the the dawn of this neoliberal era, which has continued unbroken now for 41 years, from 1979, the election of Margaret Thatcher, the election of Ronald Reagan in the United States. That's the era in which the social fabric, we had problems, of course, before, but the social fabric has been literally shredded. And the routine of dignified labor, where everyone who can work has to work, and in work they find some satisfaction. And if they don't find satisfaction, they find common interest. They find fellow workers. They find trade unionism. That trade unionism has a political face, and political education begins to somehow make its way into the workforce, into the working class. All of that has been destroyed. And now there are a precious few unionized workplaces, and those unions that still have members are increasingly seeing them as consumers, as potential sales for insurance policies and holidays and the rest. So from the point of view of the Workers' Party, you may think I sound nostalgic. You may think I sound too retro, but this feeds into the issue of this UBI that I spoke about earlier, and not all of our members are yet persuaded of my point. The crucial weakness of the working class and its potential as an agent of change from this society to the next form of society. The crucial weakness is atomization, is the disruption of organized and collective work. And that's why we cannot, as a party, in my view, we don't actually have a policy on this, but we will have to come to one. But as the leader of the party, I'm not going to hide from you my own view. We cannot be a party to policies which incentivize not working. Our demand is for work, paid work, unionized work, organized work, and politicized trade unionism. That's our demand. Now, of course, under a socialist society, not everyone can do the job they're currently doing. There are many jobs that people are currently doing that will not need doing under socialism. And with the increase of artificial intelligence, robotization, and so on, we're not Luddites, we want this. But as Jyoti said on Twitter earlier this evening, I saw, under socialism, we'll all have to work, but we'll be working less hours. We'll be working less years, but we'll all have to work. And we'll have to share the work with the robot and the artificial intelligence and with our workmate. But we will still have to work. We can't have a situation where the state, as a matter of policy, not in extremis, but as a matter of policy, is paying people not to work. Not only will that cause real economic and social problems, it defeats the purpose of being a workers' party, of believing that the workers are the agent of change to transform us from this rotten, failing capitalist society into the new world. Thanks, Rob.
Fantastic. And we have a question on a similar vein from Kat. Go ahead, Kat.
Hiya. I just wanted to ask George about the economy's increasing dependence on very, very low paid and very insecure work, and increasingly on unpaid work. I mean, like I'm a carer for my disabled daughter, and all of the narratives around that are that you can choose not to do it. That's not the reality. You cannot choose not to care for a sick or disabled relative. And when you can't choose, you're very vulnerable to being exploited. And one of the things that's happening is that if you're in a low paid insecure job, or in this unpaid, sector where you're essentially a slave and you have no rights, you're not in contact every day with people in a similar situation. You're inside your house, or you're in a job for 5 minutes, you leave, you go to another job for 5 minutes. And this makes it really, really hard to actually organise collectively around the workplace and the work that you are performing. And I think that we all know the problems with the big unions is basically they're not actually concerned about this. And the scary thing is that your job centre work coach is more likely to be unionised than you are nowadays. But I don't know if you've got any answers about what the Workers' Party can offer, really, to try and address some of those things about these insecure, isolated workers.
Well, I couldn't put the plight of those workers better than you just did in such a succinct and powerful way. And I did make reference earlier, and I should have followed it up. Not only are we demanding that furloughed staff be paid 100% of their normal wages, we're demanding that those who are actually have disappeared out the bottom of this bucket be properly looked after, because at least those who are getting the 80% are getting 80%. There are millions of workers in Britain are getting actually nothing at all. Self-employed people, people in the so-called gig economy are millions. They are in their millions. The people on 0 hours contracts before this crisis was 1 million, and it will, I'm sure, rapidly increase in number. And the unions are quite content not to recruit these workers. How hard is it? If I was a trade union officer, I'd be standing at every Deliveroo stand where the bicyclists congregate and recruiting them. How hard is it? If that was my job, that's what I'd be doing. Now, we are not trade unions. We are not trade union organizers. We can't do that. But everyone we meet, we must encourage to unionize themselves, because the truth is the only workers that have under capitalism that have any chance of getting not just the self-respect, but anything like the proper pay under capitalism are people who are unionized. I was reading today about the Teamsters in the United States. Now, in this economy, in the current climate with the virus and so on, delivery drivers are king. And it would have been easy if those drivers were unorganized for them to be ruthlessly exploited. But they're not. In the United States, paradoxically, there's less trade unionism, but that trade unionism that there is much stronger than the trade unionism here in Britain. So from the point of view of the Teamsters, if the truck driver is king, you better start paying us at least like a prince. And that's what the union is demanding. And they have successfully, in this period of the last couple of months, they have successfully negotiated, bargained for better deal for their members than existed before the crisis. There's not many British unions will be able to say the same. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you, George. And we have a question from Comrade Guy. Go ahead, Guy. Guy, are you with us?
Yeah, me. Thank you, man. Hey, George, how are you? You okay?
I'm good, yes. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, George. Just a little question. I'm getting really really annoyed. You know, I'm getting really annoyed when I see these stories every day. You know, telling us all of this fake news about this coronavirus. Now we all know that in this country, you know, people are a little bit gullible and believe a lot of the mainstream media, and we've already touched that as well. That there is no opposition to these clowns, and that the Labour Party really is dead and not really asking the right questions. So most of us on this meeting today will be watching your show on the modes. We'll be watching the Sputnik. We get a different narrative from some of the people out there in the marketplace. So we get the right information. But there are too many people that's not getting the right information, you know, and I think, like you said earlier on with Piers Morgan, you know, challenging, you know, this inept, vicious, and incapable government. I think that now it's the right opportunity, perhaps, for you, as the leader of the Workers' Party. We need to try to be a bit more creative, maybe, because we're super excellent on the social media. We're growing super fast. But I think that during this coronavirus crisis, it would be probably very useful for you as the leader of the Workers' Party to maybe we could penetrate the marketplace a bit more, try to penetrate the mainstream media, maybe having you on Piers Morgan one morning. Really, you're the only guy out there that can challenge these people. They've suppressed the Russian report before the election, and now they're suppressing information, vital information about the number of deaths in this country. I mean, it's killing fields over there. I mean, thousands of people are dying every day in care home, and they're suppressing that information. So I think that people need to wake up, and I think that it would be lovely, it would be useful, it would be great to have you out there, maybe doing a couple of interviews that we put the name of the party above, even more. Or look, there is an opposition to Keir Starmer, because the greatest challenge for that guy is actually you know, George Galloway, the leader of the Workers' Party. But I think that we need to go out there and challenge these guys. That was what I felt, because I'm really getting annoyed now. And I shouldn't say rude words, you know, but you know, to see these guys getting away with it every single day when people are dying in the thousands every day. Yeah. I mean, how many deaths have we had? 50,000 deaths so far, George, in this country. You know, take it on the chin, herd immunity, and nobody is doing anything about it. So that was my question. Much love to you and Gayatri. Speak to you soon.
God bless you, Guy. Thank you very much, not just for that question, but all the work that you've been doing on social media. You're a real asset to us, and I'm grateful for all your efforts. It's not because I don't want to go on the so-called mainstream media. It's that they don't ask me. I haven't been on the BBC for years. I haven't been on Sky for years. The only place I ever appear is on Piers Morgan, and I guess he probably figures he's doing the job that I would do on Good Morning Britain. He's doing it better, and he's certainly doing a wonderful job. And maybe he thinks it would be double bubble if he brought me on as well. Anyway, he hasn't. And so I'm not on the mainstream media, but I do want to stress this point because not everyone knows it. Our audience on the moats is far, far higher than almost any audience in the mainstream British media. If I give you an example, the Independent newspaper is read by about 80,000 people a day. The Guardian by about 140,000 people. The Sophie Ridge on Sky on a Sunday viewed by about 60,000 people. Mar is viewed by not much more than 200,000 people. These are small audiences compared to ours. So I urge you not to be despondent about that, but of course we refuse nothing but blows. If GMB asked me to come on, I'd be there. If Jeremy Vineshaw on BBC Radio asked me to be there, I'd be there. But they aren't, and I don't think that's going to change because there's clearly a settled will in the mainstream media that I am to be unpersoned, as it were. And frankly, I kind of regard that as a bit of a compliment. I notice that we are definitely getting under various people's skin. You can see that people are starting to set up, fake accounts and so on, and spreading clearly coordinated attacks on us. On my debate with Steve Bannon, for example, in Kazakhstan, and on my role in the campaign for Brexit, vis-a-vis Nigel Farage, who led that campaign, and so on. These are very clearly worked out lines of attack. So if you think about it, if we were no danger, if we were nothing for them to worry about, they wouldn't be bothering attacking us. So their attacks are an indication of the fact that, and even some of the hostile Trotskyite newspapers, for example, have made this point, that the Workers' Party under Galloway's leadership may not succeed, but it could succeed because this is a time for such a party. Now, they clearly concentrate their attack on me because they think if they can knock me out, dishearten me, demoralize me by their attacks, that I might drop out and concentrate on other things. But I'll never do that. And so if that's their intention, it's misplaced because, frankly, I've faced up to much worse than you in my life. Thank you very much, Guy.
Fantastic. And now we come to a question from Seb. Go ahead, Seb.
Hi, George. That answered the previous question I was going to ask about how to reach people. But certainly in this time, a lot of people are struggling to pay rent to private landlords. And with the great the great buy-to-let culture in this country, which leads to the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat via wealth which more often than not is inherited. What can be done to ensure that everyone has the right to satisfactory housing free from the risk of eviction due to economic issues beyond their control? And whilst this is obviously a big issue with the COVID situation, I think it's an issue that's been going on for quite a while. And would the party support a system in which the amount of property one person can own would be limited to ensure a fairer system for everyone? Yeah,
I see no justification for anyone earning profit from their ownership of a secondary or further home that they own. I'm against private landlordism in toto. I don't know if that's the party's position. I don't think we've fully debated this yet, but it's certainly my position. If I had a house, which I don't own a house, but if I did, and I was going to work in Moscow for a couple of years, I think there is nothing wrong with me letting out the house I'm vacating in order to do so. But there's no justification for me, with fiscal support from the government through the taxation system, owning one house and living in it and buying other houses so other people can live in it. I can see no justification for that, or for that matter, any need for it. What's the need for it? Our view is that public housing, in my view, council housing, but I suppose there may be some role for housing associations as they were originally intended to be, although I had my suspicions and opposed them even then at the beginning. There may be a case for cooperative housing. There's certainly a case for various shared ownership options. But what we need in Britain, above all, is a mass programme of council house building. Council houses, because the tenants elect their landlord and can unelect their landlord if the landlord is doing a poor job. Council houses, because that way we can guarantee that the houses will be built by our workforce. They will be built using our materials and can thus be an economic multiplier of very considerable proportions, massive proportions. Nothing would get the British economy kick-started better than an immediate programme to build 1 million council houses of a good standard, built by British workers, made of British steel, British brick, and so on. That would multiply activity in the economy and would, of course, at a stroke, bring down house prices, which are definitely falling already, but are going to fall much, much more. And so they should. It would bring down the demand for purchasing houses and kill the buy-to-let market, which is utterly exploitative and sordid, in my view. We have no need of it. The economy has no need of it, and the tenants have no need of it. Thanks, Seb.
Thanks, George. And we have a question from Annie. Annie, you ready to go ahead?
I am, yes. Hi, George. Nice to speak to you.
And you, Annie?
We've been speaking a lot tonight about our political demands and our programme and rules, and I think things have come across really well. I've got a lot of friends and colleagues who have the same mindset politically as myself, but they think they don't realise they're socialists, and they think that the word socialist is a dirty word. How do we as a party stop socialism being a dirty word and, to coin a phrase, make socialism great again?
Well, it's never been a dirty word for me, but I take your point. There are millions of people who, through the false consciousness that they have developed and had fed to them in the education system, in the mass media and so on, probably do think socialism is a dirty word. I was very privileged to be in what would probably be your dream meeting. I was in a meeting with Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, in which Fidel scolded Hugo Chavez in the following terms. He said, "Stop talking about socialism all the time. Do socialist things, and when people like them, tell them that's socialism." And I think that I've done it already with the term left. I no longer describe myself as left. I describe myself as a working class socialist. And because I am a working class socialist, I stand for this, 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 and this. And I find that when you tell them what the this, and this is, there's enormous support and sympathy for the way in which socialism would transform our lives. The only thing I'd add to that, Annie, is we have to contest the fake narratives in the way that I talked about right at the beginning of this meeting. It is the case that but for the socialist Red Army, we'd be having this conversation in German. It is the case that Stalin and the Red Army and the Soviet Union saved the world. It is the case that the people who fought fascism in the occupied European countries were almost all of them were people like us. the French resistance, the Yugoslav resistance, the Greek resistance, the Italian resistance, all of the partisans that were fighting fascism and saved humanity from the beast were people like us. They were socialists, they were communists, they were Reds. We have to make red great again. And we can do that if we can keep the faith and spread the faith. We can do it. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks, George. And on a similar note, we have a question from Glenn. Go ahead, Glenn.
Hello there. It's hi, Joe. Just wanted to ask a brief question on a similar note to the idea of kind of free national housing provision, or the idea of kind of council housing or socially or communally owned housing. Would the party support kind of communally owned or even nationalised and large scale nationalised food provision, on the basis that at a time where a kind of growing number of people are food insecure, and indeed millions of people, including children in this country, don't have a guarantee of food, it seems logical that we shouldn't really, or people shouldn't really, be charged for something that's just that is essential to live. You know, in the same way that people shouldn't profit off the provision of electricity or water or indeed housing.
Well, thanks, Chris. I am actually developing my thinking on this subject, and I gave a taste of it on social media earlier this week, or perhaps late last week. It is an absurdity that Britain imports fully 50% of all our food, and when it comes to fruit and vegetables, we're importing 80%. In this green and pleasant land where it rains quite a lot. We can't apparently grow our own fruit and veg, and half of our food has to come from elsewhere and is thus insecure. And at the same time, as you rightly say, there are people who are either not eating enough, and a huge number of people who are not eating well enough. In other words, not well enough in quality, in variety, and many people who are not even eating enough in quantity. So here we have unmet need. And in my interview with Professor Steve Keen on Sputnik last week, you may have seen I used the word need and he used the word demand. And he correctly schooled me on the difference between need and demand. I may need something to eat, but I can only effectively demand something to eat if I've got money to pay the person who owns and is selling that which I need to eat. But for socialists, of course, demand has no meaning, no such a deleterious or a pejorative meaning, because demand is need for a socialist. And so we have a significant proportion of our population that need food and better food. And we have a situation where, you know, maybe you're amongst them, some of you, but I used to get calls all the time telling me that Britain was full. Well, anyone who's ever flown over Britain knows that there are few emptier countries anywhere in the world. Britain is 80% empty. The state already owns large tracts of land. And yes, there is a case for a state intervention in the agricultural economy and the fishing economy. We are an island surrounded by fish, but many of our young people have never seen a fish, except without batter on it, out the chip shop. The treasures amongst in the fishing grounds of Britain are completely foreign to many of our kids In fact, most of the fish that we're catching off our own shores, we're selling abroad. So let's have fish for our own people. Let's have a state intervention in the agriculture and fisheries business. Let's support cooperative development in the agriculture and fisheries department. And one of our comrades, Tess, has got a little farm. Let's all get down there and learn a bit about farming. Let's get our fingers green. I'm for that. This is the mood I'm in at the moment. If I did the national lottery and if I won, I'd buy a village somewhere and I'd move you all into it. And we'd spend a part of our time there actually learning how to grow things, how to raise things, how to sustainably farm things, how to be less cruel to the livestock that we are raising and growing and eventually will consume on that farm, and so on. I think we're going to have to make a bit of a turn to the countryside because we have to have a holistic vision for our people, for our future. And this is undoubtedly a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Looking forward to that. That's unfortunately all we have time for tonight. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for a small technical issue earlier this evening that meant the stream started a little bit later on YouTube. We'll have that sorted out by next week, so we'll be bang on time, 8 p.m. Next Tuesday. So please all join us for that as well. And we'll also be having a meeting tomorrow at 8 p.m. Just for members where we discuss amongst ourselves policy and ideas. So if you haven't signed up yet, if you haven't joined, come join us and discuss that with us live. And I'll let you finish on whatever note you like, George.
Thank you very much, Dan. Obviously, you've got your members' meeting tomorrow night, and I'll be back on Tuesday night, God willing. We haven't yet decided on the subject, but we will, of course, give you a due notice of that. And don't forget, please, our effort to properly mark the great victory over fascism on the 9th of May. It's important in itself because it commemorates the great sacrifice which our people made in the epic struggle. It commemorates the wartime alliance which saved the world, the alliance of Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. It commemorates the vastly disproportionate sacrifice made and contribution made by the Red Army, by the army of the Soviet Union, and it will also reflect a point I made towards the end of my contribution there. And I deal with it in my novel, Queensway, for any of you who've yet read it. If Hitler had come here, it would have been all of you that would have been the resistance in Britain. We would have been the partisans in Britain. It wouldn't be Boris Johnson. I promise you that. Thanks very much indeed. Don't forget the mother of all talk shows on Sunday and Sputnik on Saturday. Thanks for joining us.